It's Loaf. I'm sure you guys remember the offline TV drama that happened earlier this year that resulted in Fedmyster being kicked out of the LTV house due to sexual allegations. Well, it turns out there's more to the story, because Fedmyster himself has come out of the dark to shed more light on what actually went down between him and Pokimane. Now, before we get into it, obviously there's no excusing Fed's actions. However, he does expose Poki on multiple occurrences of manipulating the truth. The first page is him apologizing to his fans and saying that he's been actively trying to better himself with the help of his therapist. He makes it very clear that his sole purpose in writing this is to address the individuals that are twisting the truth for their own benefit. In the second part of his manifesto, he talks about his relationship with Poki and highlights where things began to get serious. From jokingly pushing for the Foki ship to a honeymoon-like phase during a trip to Taiwan. Fed describes that their relationship had escalated. Even after the trip, he mentions times where they would become extremely flirty through text or straight up cuddle while watching shows on his laptop. And yeah, you can imagine how the rest of that went down. In the next segment, Fed talks about how he wanted to talk about the direction of the relationship, but Poki turned him down for two reasons. 1. If things don't work out, it will be problematic since they both live at the same house. 2. They both work for the same company. If things got nasty, there could be a conflict of interest. Basically, they both decided to take things slow for a bit. But eventually, after some time, things reverted back and they were both as flirty as ever. This next part, he addresses the cock-blocking allegations by explaining a story from where he himself wasn't sure of the status of his own relationship, but excitedly overshared to a roommate that they were kind of dating. At the same time, this was when Poki began to call it off on Fed. She didn't want anything to be known, especially due to the fact that the scene would be full of gossip. She also goes to say that both her and Fed should date around and that she should understand the boy scene before fully committing. The next segment talks about how more time goes by, and the two of them are experiencing a ton of off and on moments, which eventually gives Fed the mental boom. He explains that he needed to talk to someone to help set straight his emotions, which for him was often the just friend's house. He further addresses her original claim for manipulating her friends to leave her feeling alienated by saying that the intention was only for emotional support. On top of that, Fed claims that Poki made no effort to feel less isolated unless there was some tangible benefit for herself. Later on down the timeline, he describes Poki meeting and playing a lot with another person. Let's call him Steve. She began to lose interest in Fed, to the point where he felt like she was only giving him barely enough attention just to keep his interest in her alive, while she spent her days with Steve. The whole cycle would happen over and over again with other guys that she would get close to, and once she was done with them, she would start to get close to Fed again. The sleepovers would resume, the flirtatious texting. And at times, she would even act possessive towards Fed. Now, let's take a look at the Yvonne situation.
Fed would start talking to me about how Yvonne was lazy and not working enough and playing League all the time. And I was concerned. And he would say, oh, she won't work on OTV stuff with me or brainstorm and blah, blah, blah. This discussion got to the point of us almost letting Yvonne go from the company.
Here's what Fed reveals to have happened. Originally, Yvonne moved into the house in mid-2018 to be Poki's personal assistant and the OTV house manager. Things were good at first, but over time, Poki would complain about Yvonne, in private to me about how little effort she's showing her when it comes to helping her. She would call her lazy and not creative. Poki really wanted someone that could give 110%, and it was made clear to her that she was doing the bare minimum. She would complain about how much she's playing. From the private messages that Fed leaks in his manifesto, you could pretty clearly see that he was questioning and almost defending Yvonne's desire to be a content creator, whereas Poki called it weird and pushed for the idea of kicking her out. Again, Fed's actions in the past with pushing physical boundaries are not to be excused, and for the most part everyone can agree it was wrong. But at the same time, leading someone else on for years can emotionally destroy them as a person. Since the leak of Fed's manifesto, Pokimane herself says she feels forced to share her side of the story again, but this time with additional context. In the first segment, she addresses the Yvonne situation by saying that it was heavily influenced by the fact that Fed touched Yvonne inappropriately, which was something that OTV was not aware of at the time. She also shares screenshots of a conversation with Fed, saying that Yvonne realistically couldn't contribute much, and that having her was simply nice to have a human around. Pokimane reveals that it was around this time that they had an OTV meeting under the impression that Fed was genuinely seeing a problem with Yvonne not pulling her weight. He had complained to other members of the house multiple times over. However, they never knew of Fed's inappropriate incident with Yvonne. Later in the segment, Pokimane addresses Fed's claim of trying to kick Yvonne out of the OTV house by saying she did not fully understand the extent of the incident with Fed and Yvonne. She eventually found out because it was publicly announced in an episode with Dr. K. In full support of Yvonne, she explains that anyone in her position would have reacted the same way towards Fed, and the whole situation was wrongly played out to have everyone question her work ethic. Pokimane also provides additional information about the whole Steve situation with the help of Janet, another streamer that was present at one of the OTV parties. Janet reveals that she had actually talked to Fed on a voice call where he admits to lying to Steve about his and Pokimane's relationship. Pokimane also addresses their relationship over the course of this time at the OTV house. She describes him as a serial flirt who would often push boundaries with other girls. She reveals that because of how much had happened, anything between them felt almost casual and insignificant. In response to Fed's emotional distress of being led on for years, she says that she tried to be as transparent as possible in an effort to not lead him on. From him constantly pursuing and flirting with other girls to sleeping in other female OTV members' beds, it was a difficult situation considering that they were both roommates and talents at the same content house. Anyways, that's all for today. Until next time, keep it fresh. See ya.